Hello, dear friends, and welcome. Welcome, dear friends, to our weekly program on our channel, our YouTube channel, and Facebook page. This is a live broadcast from Divine Light Spiritist Group in Northern California. My name is Sunshine Beck. We're live streaming on the Divine Light YouTube page and on the Bisea Spiritual Healing Center YouTube page, and we're also live streaming on Facebook on the Divine Light Spiritist Center Facebook page. And we're focusing every week from 6 to approximately 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on the Gospel according to Spiritism. And in the Gospel, in particular, we study the Spirit's teachings. You may have noticed that Allan Kardec created the Gospel by separating it into many different chapters. And the chapters always start with some quotes from the Gospel, from the Bible. And then Allan Kardec, gives his commentary. And then after that, he offers us the Spirit's teachings, which are additions, explanations, further clarifications from different spirits that are more evolved than we are. And today we're finding ourselves in chapter 5 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, which is entitled Blessed Are the Afflicted. And last week and the week prior, we already studied some items from the Spirit's teachings of that chapter, which is the longest chapter in the Gospel. And of course, we can understand why, right? It's because we're all afflicted. On earth, it is a central problem we're all dealing with, and that is pain, affliction, unhappiness, and everything that comes with it. So today we will be studying items 24 through 26, and we will start with a message by Delphine de Girardin in Paris, 1861, and it is entitled True Misfortune. So let us understand, let us open our hearts and minds, and let us tune in and see what she has to teach us. What is true misfortune? Do we know what true misfortune is? Let us see, dear friends. For that, we will be sharing the screen. So I ask you to bear with me for just a moment. We're going to do it. We're going to share the screen. So let us see. We have the slideshow. We'll start. And here we go. So chapters 24 through 26 and items 24 through 26. True misfortune. So let us see. Everyone talks about misfortune. Everyone talks about misfortune. I have come to tell you that nearly everyone is mistaken, and that true misfortune is not everything that people, those who are unfortunate, believe it to be. So this is an interesting opening. We may not understand true misfortune correctly. Let us see what Delphine is helping us to understand. They see, so people, we see true misfortune in poverty, the fireless chimney, the threatening creditor, the cradle empty of that angel who used to smile. They see it in tears, the coffin we walk behind with an uncovered head and broken heart, the anguish of betrayal. So these are what we call misfortune. We're truly upset when we don't have much money, when we're suffering from poverty. We're truly upset when the banks are harassing us for payments of our mortgage and we don't have the money, or credit card payments. and we don't have the money. We get very upset. We get upset when we lose children. They die. Or if we can't bear children, we can't have children. In general, we dread death. We can't really deal with betrayal. We get very upset. And the list goes on. Now let us see. Is that really truly misfortune? What do you think, friends? Let's see what she says. All this and much more is called misfortune in human language. Yes, it is misfortune for those who see nothing but the present. So if we're truly upset and see misfortune in poverty and a threatening creditor, in our children dying and betrayal, etc., etc., our view is short-sighted. Our eyes are myopic. We just see the moment, and at best, this whole entire lifetime. However, true misfortune, Delphine is explaining, is found more in the consequences of what? In the consequences of a thing than in the thing itself. So what she's saying is poverty itself is not necessarily misfortune. As a matter of fact, poverty can be the biggest gift for us in life because, for example, in a previous incarnation, we made some seriously wrong moves with the fortune we had. So in order for us not to accrue more debt, this lifetime we're blessed with poverty. She gives us more examples. She says, tell me if an event that is most happy for the moment, but which leads to disastrous consequences, is not really more unfortunate than the one that first causes a great vexation, but ends up resulting in the good? Isn't that the truth? Sometimes we think that being diagnosed with cancer is the absolute worst misfortune. And little do we know that that is possibly the greatest gift in our lives for transformation, for all kinds of changes. In order for one to judge something, one must look at the consequences. So today, Delphine invites us to reconsider our misfortunes. Let us pick one misfortune in our lives and let us try to apply what Delphine is inviting us to do, to look beyond it, to open our eyes, our minds, our hearts to the fact that this lifetime is but a speck on our long line of immortality. This is just one moment. If we consider previous incarnations, if we consider maybe just things we've done or not done in this incarnation, if we look beyond what we think is misfortune and look at the consequences, if we consider that God is all merciful and just, absolute, God is absolutely perfect. There is never a mistake. Ultimately, everything is in our best interest. So today we're invited to look at our misfortunes with a new eye, the eye that has a bigger picture, that is looking at different realms, that's looking into the past and beyond the misfortune into the future, to look at the consequence. What will it lead us to? Because it is through pain that we learn the most on our consciousness level. She says, that is why in order to determine what is really fortunate or unfortunate, one must be transported beyond this life. Because it is there that the consequences will be felt. So if we don't have enough money, let us consider the opportunities. Let us look at it again. And let us realize that the spirits on high in the Spirits book taught us very clearly that both poverty as well as wealth are trials. But the trial that's more challenging, that invites us to make easier mistakes, is wealth, just as an example. Everything that is called unhappiness, according to your short-sightedness, ends with corporeal life and finds its compensation in the future life. And that is the other thing. Suffering, misfortune, often results and is based on the law of cause and effect. Not always, but often. So there's some seeds we planted in our gardens of eternity in the past that led to the consequences today. We're never the victims. There's no one to blame but us. And if it's not steeped in any wrongdoing, then we most likely co-created the situation as misfortune for us because we were pretty ambitious. We wanted to accelerate our growth, for example. So let us remember, true misfortune is found more in the consequences of a thing than in the thing itself. It will help us. Let us look beyond this lifetime. Let us see backwards and forwards. I will reveal misfortune to you under a new form, she says, under a beautiful and colorful form that you will desire and welcome with all the strength of your deluded souls. And this is the side effect, so to speak, of what she's gifting us with tonight. And that is that we will be happier because we will be better able to be patient and surrendered to our misfortunes. Misfortunes are the joy. Let's say that again. We'll say that again. Misfortunes are the joy, the pleasure, the turmoil, the empty agitation, and the insane satisfaction of vanity that silences the conscience, oppress the action of thought, and confuse people about their future. Misfortune is the opium of the forgetfulness that you ardently desire. Let us meditate on this, dear friends. Misfortune is the opium of the forgetfulness that we ardently desire. What a new way of looking at misfortune. What a beautiful, consoling message, rewriting our whole entire script. Yes, no wonder chapter 5 is the longest chapter, because we need a lot of help to understand and practice hardship, misfortune, pain, loss, affliction in a new form and shape. It is part of our transition, and this transition of planet Earth to a planet of regeneration is understanding true misfortune as well as other things. May Spiritism enlighten you and reestablish truth and error in their true light after having been so strangely deformed by your blindness. Yes, it is our blindness that causes us the most pain, our ignorance. And often we have it backwards because we judge things just by the surface. Is it shiny? Great. Is it dull? No, I don't want it. Right, friends? What does it matter to those who have faith in the future to leave their riches and their mantle of flesh upon the battlefield of life, provided their soul enters radiantly into the heavenly kingdom? And that is the thing. Suffering often, if it is born with resignation and patience, ends up to a very peaceful future. We see it in so many cases that Allan Kardec gifted us with in heaven and hell. Among the happy spirits that he brings are many who went through excruciating suffering during their lifetimes, and they're bored with absolute serenity. And did they get rewarded afterwards? So let us focus on the consequences, on the future, because every little step in that direction will help us to establish the kingdom of God in our souls. This is how we do it. This was Delphine. So let us meditate on true misfortune by considering its consequences. Now let us move on to item 25. And this is entitled Melancholy. It's by François de Genève. So he says, do you know why a vague sadness sometimes weighs upon your hearts and makes you find life so bitter? Do we know? Do we know sometimes why we experience life so bitter and why we have this vague sadness like a cloak around us, like a cloud, like our own personal cloud? Do we know? Let's see. It is your spirit which aspires to happiness and freedom, and which, bound to the body that serves as its prison, exhausts itself in vain efforts to escape. However, seeing that such efforts are useless, it falls into despondency, and the body, bearing the spirit's influence, sluggishness, dejection, and a kind of apathy, seizes you, and you find yourself unhappy. So let us, what did she say? Let us take it apart. Melancholy is when our spirit aspires to happiness and freedom, which we all do. Sometimes more, other times less. But the spirit wants to be happy. The spirit wants to be free. The spirit then realizes, wait, I'm bound to the body. How can I be free? And then tries to free itself, to escape, but can't. It exhausts itself in its efforts to be free because it can't. During an incarnation, the spirit isn't free, really. It's caught in the body. And as a result, the spirit feels despondent. And as a result, because the spirit, the body is the extension of the spirit, they're intimately connected, the body starts feeling sluggish and apathetic. And then what happens? Unhappiness settles in. And then the willpower gets weakened. And that is the definition of melancholy. This is the mechanism, really, of how melancholy establishes itself in us. Believe me, he says. Believe me and strongly resist these feelings that weaken your willpower. Can we say yes to that? I'm sure we all have had moments of melancholy. And in those moments, we have no energy. We just lie on the couch, or we drink extra coffee, or we crave sugar, or we downright stay in bed because we have no energy. We're just exhausted. And it weakens our willpower. Our will at that moment is not aligned with God. It surrenders to this battle, this internal battle. The yearnings for a better life are innate in the spirit of all humans, but do not seek them in this world. So this is not the time to seek this better life, this freedom. Not right now. And if we truly understand it, we don't resist it. Then we wake up every day. We go about fulfilling our duties. We align our will with God's will. We see everything as a prayer because we focus on doing the good. Melancholy has no space in our lives at that moment. If we understand this is not the time for our spirit to be free. Remember that during your trial on the earth, you have a mission that you cannot doubt, whether in dedicating yourself to your family or whether in fulfilling the various obligations that God has entrusted to you. And that is the thing. We're here to learn new lessons, to undo past wrongs, to fulfill our duties, to sometimes fulfill regenerative duties, as Emmanuel calls it in Thought and Life. Those are the duties that we omitted, didn't fulfill in previous incarnations, and now they come back through painful experiences in relationships, through poverty, through challenges, through afflictions. So we're here to fulfill our reincarnatory plan. This is not the time to party for our spirit. This is the time to get to work. Yes. If during the course of this trial, which is our lives in these bodies, and while performing your task, you see worries, troubles, and vexations fall upon you, be strong, be courageous in order to bear them. So we're invited to be strong and courageous. Courageous word is linked to the French cœur, which means heart. Let us take heart. Let us be strong in our hearts. Face the challenges resolutely. They are of short duration and will lead you to the friends of whom you weep. They will rejoice at your arrival amongst them and will extend their arms to you, to lead you to the place where the afflictions of earth have no access. It's almost like Delphine, who pointed towards the future and said, look, the consequences of the challenges you experience right now. And here Françoise too says, be courageous, be resolute, be strong, and think this will only be short, because soon you will be reunited with loved ones. Soon you will be falling into the arms of those who will pat you on the back and say, well done, friend. It is so beautifully consoling, isn't it, dear friends? It lightens our load. Our cross is not as heavy anymore, thanks to these beautiful messages. Yes. So this was item 25. So let us be courageous. Our trials are short. Yes, they are short. Even though in the moment it feels forever. But that's again when we're invited to not be too myopic in our view, because they really are short in the bigger picture. Now let us move on to item 26. Item 26 is by the Spirit, a guardian angel in 1863. So a guardian angel is talking to us about voluntary trials. And it starts off by asking, is it permissible for those who are drowning to save themselves? Can we save ourselves if we're about to drown, or do we need to surrender fatalistically? For those of you who have a thorn to remove, is it permissible? Do we have permission to remove a thorn that's in our bodies? For those who are ill, is it permissible to call a doctor? Should we be calling a doctor? Here's the answer. Trials are meant to engender intelligence as well as patience and resignation. Definition of resignation that Allan Kardec gives us is the surrender of the heart. resignation. We're not resisting. Obedience is surrender of the mind, so it makes sense to us. But one step deeper, the heart is aligned as well. That's resignation. So trials are meant to engender intelligence. We learn from them, we educate ourselves, as well as patience and resignation. Individuals may be born into a painful and difficult situation precisely to make them search for the means of overcoming it. So maybe the trial is boosting our intelligence. That's exactly what we mean to learn to do, to find new ways, to do the research, to do the work, to overcome a challenge. It really boosts our resilience. The merit consists in bearing without complaint the consequences of the ills that cannot be avoided. So in other words, the answer to the question, is it permissible for those who are drowning to save themselves, and is it permissible for us to go to a doctor when we're sick? The answer A is we are here to learn to surrender to our challenges, to our ills, to bear them without complaining when they cannot be avoided. When they cannot be avoided. In persevering, so let's do that. The merit consists in bearing without complaint the consequences of the ills that cannot be avoided. In persevering in the struggle and in not becoming desperate if unsuccessful. Sometimes we can't overcome something. But without giving into indifference, which would be laziness more than virtue. You see the twofold answer? Yes, we are permitted to call a doctor, to help to heal ourselves, to save ourselves from drowning. We know these bodies are a gift from God. We're here to take care of our physical form. We're here not to deprive our body, to create a form of suicide. That's not our mission. But when affliction hits us, we are invited to surrender to it, to be patient, to not complain, but at the same time be active and find a solution. So the answer is not to say, okay, I'm sick, I'm meant to be sick, I'm going to just not do anything. I'm not going to call a doctor, I'm not going to try to find any way to heal myself, to help alleviate the situation. I'm just going to surrender. That's not the answer. That's not where our merit lies. That she calls laziness, and that's not a virtue. However, we're not supposed to become frustrated if we can't change our situation. For example, we have an accident and we become paraplegic and we try everything to start walking again and it doesn't work. We just can't overcome that, possibly. At that moment, her prescription kicks in. That's when we need to persevere in the struggle, even if it's unsuccessful, without complaint, with patience, without becoming indifferent or lazy. This question, of course, leads to another. So the question, is it permissible, for example, for those who are ill to call a doctor? Here's the next question this leads to. Since Jesus said, "Blessed are the afflicted," is there any merit in seeking afflictions? 2, even if everything's fine right now, okay, maybe I should add an affliction to my life because Jesus said, "Blessed are the afflicted," because thereby I would be increasing my trials by means of voluntary suffering. Is that the path? Should we do that? What do you think, dear friends? Should we add to our load to increase some voluntary suffering because Jesus said, "Blessed are the afflicted"? Are we then actually be blessed? So, the guardian angel says, To this I will respond very clearly. Yes, there is great merit if such suffering and privations are meant for the good. So yes, there is a place for voluntary suffering, but only if it is for the good. And it's only for the good of one's neighbor, not just for us. Yes, there is merit if such suffering and privations are meant for the good of one's neighbor. Why? Because it is charity, friends. Charity, right? The law of justice, love, and charity, the most important divine law that comes all the way at the end of the Spirit's book. Charity. There is no salvation without charity. So voluntary suffering for the benefit of our neighbors is charity, and that is sacrifice, which is the good. And in that way, there is merit in voluntary suffering. And the answer is answered no. Is there merit on loading up more trials on us if they're meant only for the good of oneself? If it's only good for me, no. Then we're not going to add some extra suffering, some extra trial to the picture. Because that desire to do so results from selfishness and fanaticism. So this is an interesting perspective. What did the guardian angel say? Should we be adding voluntary trials to our lives? The answer is yes, if it's for the good of others. That is called charity. And then we sacrifice ourselves for the good. No, when the voluntary trial is only good for us, because that's then selfishness. Very clear, friends, right? So clear. It makes life so much easier. We know exactly what to do. A big distinction must be made here. As for you personally, be content with the trials that God sends you and do not increase their burden. So for us personally, just for our own lives, let us not add any voluntary trials. Remember that selfishness. Let us be content with what we have in forms of trials. Accept them faithfully without complaining. That is our work with our trials. To accept them faithfully without complaining. And right there, we're most likely quite busy because we're so prone to complaining, right, friends? So easy to complain when something doesn't work our way. That is all God asks of you. No complaining. Bearing our trials with patience and resignation. Do not weaken your body with useless privations and purposeless mortifications. That's pretty clear, right? Let us not needlessly weaken our body. To needlessly weaken your bodies is true suicide. So this is also important. Remember, we were reminded of André Louis in the book No Solar. After his discarnation, he was labeled a suicide. He was shocked. He couldn't understand it. Say, me, I didn't commit suicide. Well, we, alongside him, learned that since he didn't take care of his physical form during his life, it was an indirect form of suicide that he committed. So here we're reminded to not needlessly weaken our body, because that will be true suicide. So if we drink all the time, we smoke, we starve our body almost to death. There's so many ways how we can weaken our bodies. Malnutrition. That doesn't mean necessarily we're skinny. We can be very heavy and be malnourished because all we're eating is sugar, junk food, and the list goes on. So no needless weakening. of the body. Use it, use the body, but do not abuse it. Let us use our bodies, but let us not abuse them. Such is the law, the angel says. The abuse of the best things brings its punishment in unavoidable consequences. So we know that there is no punishment. This is the older version. It's a word that we know is not, we don't link to God. But there will be a consequence. Law of cause and effect is always active. The suffering that one imposes on oneself for the relief of one's neighbor is something entirely different. So the suffering we impose on ourselves for the benefit of our neighbor is totally different. That does not fall into this category. If you endure cold and hunger in order to warm and feed someone who is in need, and if your body suffers because of that, it is then a sacrifice that is blessed by God. That is charity, dear friends. You who retire from the world in order to avoid in seductions and to live in isolation, what is your usefulness? So this is another question. Are we supposed to retire from the world in order to avoid its seductions and to live in isolation? What would be our usefulness in that sense? Remember, the law of labor is any useful activity. We're always invited, urged to make ourselves useful. And making ourselves useful is useful for the common good, for our brothers and sisters. That doesn't exclude us, but it's not only us. That's the difference. And so the answer to the question is, where is your courage in trial, since you run from the struggle and desert the fight? If you want sackcloth, apply it to your soul and not your body. So are we supposed to retire from the world to avoid its seductions and to live in isolation? No, because then we're not useful. Where is our courage? We're invited to be courageous and take on the seductions of life, to learn its lessons, not to run from struggle. We're not supposed to run from struggle, but we're also not invited to add struggling to us if it's only for our own good. So it's a fine line, right? If you want sackcloth is a garment that the Israelites wore for mourning. So also sometimes equated to ashes. So applying sackcloth means, putting ashes on, destroying our body, in other words. So if you want sackcloth, apply it to your soul and not your body. Mortify your spirit, not your flesh. Whip your pride, receive humiliation without complaint. Flog your selfishness and harden yourselves against the pain of insult and slander. More pungent. It is more pungent than bodily pain. So for us, we need to focus rather on our spirit, the immortal part of us, in order to reach change, to acquire change, but not flogging our bodies. They're sacred. They need to be nourished. So kept strong, so we can fulfill our duties, so we can fulfill our incarnation and not be labeled indirect suicides or suicides. But what we need to focus on, she says, is mortify your spirit instead. And what does she mean by mortifying our spirit? I'm saying she, the angel. What does the angel mean by mortifying our spirit? Whipping our pride, to get rid of our pride, our selfishness, flogging our selfishness, receiving humiliation with grace, enduring insult and slander. Turning the other cheek, returning good for evil. Practicing the good, seeking the good, visualizing the good, molding the good with all the resources 24/7 and all the time. That's what we are invited to do. This is true sackcloth, the angel says, whose wounds will be taken into account because they will testify to your courage and submission to God's will. Dear friends, that completes item 26 by the guardian angel. Let us for a moment recap. We had 3 main lessons tonight. One is the invitation to see true misfortune from a different perspective, namely from the perspective of its consequences, rather than the short-sighted view of this hurts, it's bad, I'm resisting it. But looking at the consequences, what will it do for us? Where's the blessing? That was number 1. Number 2, we were invited to avoid melancholy. Why? Melancholy, which is this desire of the spirit to be free and happy. And this is not the moment, because we're here for a purpose in this incarnation, which is a blessing. But we're invited to avoid melancholy because it weakens our willpower. We become tired, we lose initiative, we're not feeling good. Because when the spirit doesn't feel good, the body won't feel good. And it will prevent us from fulfilling our duties, of aligning our will with God's will, of fulfilling God's will. It weakens us. And then we learned that voluntary suffering is good if it's for the good of our neighbors, if it's charity, if we suffer for a purpose, and the purpose is to do the good for our neighbors. That is meritorious. However, voluntary suffering only for our own good won't help us. That's called selfishness according to the Spirit. And if we want to apply sackcloth, we're invited to do that to our spirits rather than our bodies, because we have a duty to take care of our physical forms. It's sacred. Our bodies are sacred. But what we are here for is to reduce our selfishness and pride, to handle humiliation, slander, and insults with grace, to turn the other cheek, to return good for evil. That is the true sackcloth. That's the true transformation, but not flogging our bodies in the name of God. Dear friends, let us stop sharing and let us see. Oh, there are some friends. Thank you for joining. It's so lovely. Mark, thank you so much for being here. And Linda Damnell, thank you, dear friend. And Tony, thank you for being here, dear friend. And thank you for the lesson. Yes, we're so grateful for the lesson. Thanks to Allan Kardec and his diligent work and these beautiful spirits who came through, and thanks to the mediums at the time who immortalized these messages. So it is with so much gratitude in our hearts that we're closing tonight. And so God willing, we will be seeing each other again next week, same time, same place, with the continuation of Chapter 5. We're not finished yet. Many blessings, dear friends. Much love. See you later.